welcome everybody to this presentation. My name is Tom O'Brien, as David said. I'm the Program Director for Neighborhood Connections, which is a small grants program affiliated with the Cleveland Foundation in Cleveland, Ohio. And we have been in existence for 5 years. We're going into our 6th year of funding. We provide small grants between $500 and $5,000 to grassroots organizations in the city of Cleveland, Ohio. Grants go to both small nonprofit organizations or groups that are thinking of becoming nonprofits, as well as block clubs, neighborhood associations, more loose-knit organizations as well. We've funded over $2.6 million worth of, provided $2.6 million worth of grants in our first 5 years to over 500 community organizations in the city of Cleveland. So I have some experience working with these groups, both as a community organizer and in my present role. The information I'm going to talk about today comes from a number of sources. One, it comes from my experience as a community organizer and as the director of this program. And it also comes from information from the Foundation Center, from the Cleveland Foundation, and from various websites and books, including the New York Foundation and a couple of other sites. So I can provide you with that information if you wish. My contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So let's get started here. Our goal for today is to present ways that organizations can bring in their first dollars and begin to fundraise for their future. And what we hope to do is identify early donor prospects, to present your elevator speech or case statement to learn about that, self-assess the readiness of your organization to fundraise, and then recognize factors to consider when you pursue contributions both from foundations, earned income, and government funding, and then review the advantages and disadvantages and challenges of each potential funding source. So as we go along, feel free to pose questions, and also at the end I'll try and answer those as best I can. The first thing you need to do, and this is what I tell all the organizations I work with, because they come in many different forms. Some are really new to the nonprofit world and have really big dreams and hopes, but haven't really had much experience in the field. So the first thing I ask them to do is to scan the area, to do a survey, visual scan or just research who else is doing the type of work they want to do in their neighborhood or their community. And are you duplicating services? Is there a need for this service? Has there been a need expressed by the community that's not being fulfilled? So survey your service area, and then also looking to see are there local funders available or in the area that could provide funding for the organization that you wish to serve. And we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of finding local funding. Do you have opportunities for organizational support, organizational development support in your community that's easily accessible and affordable? And also, is your organization ready to fundraise? And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a bit. But I think this is vital. A lot of folks come in with big dreams and hopes, but no real practical experience in doing fundraising, nor in creating an organization. Many folks have done this for years on their own without a lot of help, and they've done it out of their own pocket, and they want to formalize. And I think the challenge is to see if that is truly realistic for them. The question is, your organization ready to fundraise? And the Foundation Center has good information on this, but that you could access on their website through their Introduction to Fundraising Planning course. But you need to do an asset inventory to identify your organization's strengths and assets in the following areas: in terms of program, in terms of your board, in terms of your staff, and in terms of fundraising as well. And those questions are really important to see what are your strengths and how to build on those strengths. What are your connections in the community? What connections your board has, your staff? What are their skills and expertise? And also, what kind of programs do you have that could be funded through various means? Some basic steps to raising funds for startups. the first thing you need is a really strong case statement. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is really the core element of any successful fundraising program. And the second step is research how much you actually need to raise. What's your goal, fundraising goal? To create a budget, what is your projected income? What are your projected expenses? Then determine the best ways to fund your organization. Is it through foundations? Is it through individual donors? Is it through federated programs like the United Way or Community Shares? Is it through in-kind donations? Is it through some of the other sources we mentioned, government funding or earned income? And then decide whom you need to approach and how you'll approach them, and that's creating the fundraising plan. The first thing I just want to go over is, as I said, the strong case statement. This is vital for fundraising for any organization, but especially for startup organizations. And a case statement is a brief document, usually no more than 2 pages, that makes your case. It explains why potential funders, both institutional and individual, should support your organization. Case statements inform your proposals or appeal letters to donors and build a strong claim for funding. And organizations typically respond to the following questions when building their case statement. Why does the agency exist, and what is the mission of the agency or the organization? And what are the specific problems in society that you plan to address? Who will benefit from your work, and what methods will you use to alleviate these problems? And explain, do you have a track record of accomplishment? Describe your board, staff, and volunteers, and community alliances and their expertise and qualifications to tackle these problems. And then what resources you actually need to advance your efforts, and how will you actually raise the funds. And another approach to developing case statement is try to anticipate and answer the questions potential donors are most likely to ask. To know what are some questions that they would ask, and these are some of the key ones that I think they would ask, so that they would understand why you're doing what you are doing and what your expertise is in that field, and to prove to them, to show them that you have this expertise. The other part of this is creating an elevator speech, which is about 15 or 20 seconds, where you take your case statement and hone it down so that if you do meet a potential donor, or if you do talk to somebody, you can really get that point across and make it clear to them what you want to do and catch your attention in a very, very short amount of time. Because a lot of times those meetings do happen when you're at some type of networking session, or it could be just going up, as an elevator speech suggests, in an elevator with somebody that you meet or that you recognize, and you have an opportunity to pitch your idea or your program, and you don't get a lot of time with them. So it really has to be clear, and it has to be concise, and it has to make get your information, be really a sales job on what you want to do. Very quick one. The second step, as I said, was create a budget. What are your costs? What are your expenses? What's your income? And the costs associated with what you want to do. And then to create a fundraising plan. What are your fundraising goals? How much money do you want to raise? How are you going to raise it? So if you need $100,000, you're going to get 100 donors to give $1,000, or are you going to get a large donation of $20,000, one large donation, and then set to get like $5,000 donations, and then, 10 $500 donations, and then the rest smaller than that. So it's really important to diversify your funding mix and set realistic fundraising goals for what you want to do. The other part of it is to put together a fundraising plan and a timetable, so a calendar as to when you actually hope to meet these goals. And then you'll have this record of, well, did you meet these goals? Did you not meet these goals? So that you can look back in future years and say, hey, we met, this worked. Why did this work? This didn't work. How come? What can we do better? And where can we look elsewhere if this source is not available? Again, the Foundation Center has some great material on that to create a fundraising plan, and actually teaches a free introductory course on that as well. When I work with startup organizations, here in Cleveland, most of the time I talk about really raising funds from two areas: individual donors, and that includes in-kind donations and volunteer labor, and also foundation support. Those are really the two avenues I think that startup organizations should look at when they first start raising funds. And I'll talk a little bit about that, about each of those. The other types of opportunities besides individual donors and private funding opportunities like foundations and corporations are earned income and government funding, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end. With individual donors, this is where the vast majority of all money donated to nonprofits comes from the private sector. They come from individuals. And a lot of the times people think, well, I got to really find someone who has a lot of money. Well, that's not the case. Usually the average citizen, someone who really is passionate about what you're doing, they may have a family member who needs your services. They may have interest in it for some other reason. They may be a volunteer with your organization or a board member. They give the most money to nonprofit organizations. And creating that donor base is really important initially, to build a broad base of support from within the community, and for a couple of reasons. One, it shows that you do have support. So for other funders, it shows you do have support from the community in what you're trying to do. And the other part of it is it shows that you do have flexible resources. You do have flexible resources, and this money isn't tied. A lot of times foundation money is tied to a particular program. This money you can use for a lot of different things. The ongoing resource, this resource can be expanded over time. If someone sees that you're doing good work, you can actually go back to them and sometimes access more money. Or they may have connections to other folks as well. A couple of folks you may want to ask. One, to start off with, is, well, let me just talk about the challenges. The challenges, you need significant assistance from your board and volunteers. They're the ones who have the connections in many cases that you may not have, and they may be folks who may be able to donate themselves or know folks who would donate to this cause, who have an interest in this cause. Your initial amounts raised usually won't compare to a large grant award. It's going to take time. It's going to take time to build up this amount of money and develop your donor base. You need to keep a really good record of the awards and nurture those relationships from donors. And again, as I said, it's going to take time. There are different methods to get funding from individual donors. One is face-to-face appeals, and this is the most effective way. It's setting up a meeting with someone who has expressed interest in your program, to talk to them about your program, to provide your case statement to them, and to talk about why this is important, to ask them for money. Other types of face-to-face appeals could be door knocking, which some groups do, though that's less effective than doing a one-on-one sort of meeting with someone. But there's some. I worked for an organizing group where we were working on environmental issues, and part of it was knocking on the door of people's homes in the affected area to talk to them about the issue, but also to raise funds for our organization by talking to them and asking them for a donation too, which is a little tougher sell like that. If you have someone you identify, you can, who's interested, you can sit down and do a one-on-one discussion with them about what their interests are and why they're interested in this, and talk a little bit about your program. The other way is to do personal phone calls, a little less effective, but another way you could talk to somebody and say, hey, we're working on this issue. I know you're interested. Are you interested in donating to our efforts? Personal letters to folks is another way. And then an appeal letter, which is more of a mass mailing to contacts, which is, a little bit less effective, but it is a way to get information out, have a donation envelope in there, or a way for people to contribute online. And then hold special events, fundraising events, a golf outing or some kind of barbecue, or, one organization I work for does a night at the races, which is a way for them to raise money. So there's all different ways to do that, and it's what you're comfortable with and what people would actually have fun at, and also how you're going to will it make a little bit of money. Most contributions, first contributions for startup community-based organizations aren't financial. With the groups I work with, most of the initial contributions come in the form of in-kind gifts and volunteer time. By far, the groups that I work with, the organizations I work with, it comes in volunteer time. That is overwhelmingly the largest contribution, people giving their gifts and talents in that form. The other is in-kind donations. And folks ask for space. Sometimes they get space for free, which is a donation. They may get, desks and chairs or computers as an in-kind gift, paper, other kinds of resources that they may need, copy machine, anything, that they may need. They, in many cases, can get it through an in-kind gift to get started. The other way is to create a list of people and organizations who have expressed interest in your work, and then make a list and talk with your board and talk with your volunteers. What are some of the things that those folks who have expressed interest in your work, what can they contribute to help you get started? Is it something material, like a copier or like a, phone line or whatever it may be, space, or it could be financial resources as well, or it could be a connection. It could be very well a connection to someone who can access those resources for you. This group, your first contributors, your volunteers, your initial board members, people who have expressed interest, that's your initial donor list. And this will show, as I said before, that you do have a broad base of support, which will help you raise additional funds. And it's really vital to nurture these relationships, to treat your volunteers well, to treat your board members well, to get to know them, and to talk to them about your vision and the vision for the organization and what their vision is. Because they are going to be the folks who are out in the community who are going to be talking up your program, talking with other folks in the community who you may not have access to, and really selling that program. Some tips, some small tips that I tell some of the groups I work with. Have the board chair, if you do have a board at this point, if you are a nonprofit, ask the board chair to ask each board member to donate. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Some may not be able to donate much. But it's important for funders to see that each member of the board has donated to the organization, both in terms of time but also in terms of financial resources. The second is to request contributions in your newsletter. You can put a envelope in there that folks can write a check and send it back to you with a little bit of information, or you could have people could access it online on your website if you have a website. But to put that in there. The other part is when you have events in the community, you could do something like pass the hat. I know a lot of political campaigns I've been involved with. That was a big way. They'd always pass the hat. Like at churches, and they're always passing the basket around. So, and also to have donation envelopes available as well if folks want to donate, because a lot of folks will say, "Well, how can I help?" And that's one of the ways they can help. They can provide financial help. Also in terms they can volunteer and other things, but one of the ways they can help is through financial donations. Ask your volunteers, local businesses, and other supporters for donations, financial and in-kind donations. And then if you are going to do fundraising events, have a regular schedule of fundraising events so that folks know, year in and year out when this event is going to happen. When I was a kid, I remember there was a young man in my neighborhood where I grew up who had cystic fibrosis, and every year they would have this fundraising event, this barbecue for him, and we would all get together. And that weekend was pretty much set aside by people in our neighborhood to go to that barbecue because everyone knew him, they had a relationship with his family, and they would set that time aside to actually go to raise money for that event. So have it regularly scheduled so that people are aware of it. The other thing with individual donors is you really need to publicize your efforts. So potential donors are aware of your work. So developing a relationship with the local media, a daily or weekly newspaper, maybe local television stations if you can, or radio, newsletters from organizations, other community organizations, so that folks are aware of what you want to do, and that potential donors or people who are interested in helping out in some way are aware of your work and can contact you. The second part of this with individual donors on this slide is recognize the volunteers in your donors and staff and board efforts. Really show them a lot of appreciation. The volunteers, to keep volunteers, I mean, it's an art to keep volunteers. And a big part of it is recognizing their work, appreciating their work, having special days for them, special outings, as a way to really recognize what they're going to do. The same goes with donors. If you do a newsletter, putting their names in the newsletter. Again, make sure their names are spelled right. And if they ask that the money go to a certain program, or they want it to go to in memory of somebody or in honor of somebody, make sure you get that right in the newsletter. Same with staff and board efforts. Recognize them, thank them for their efforts, and nurture those relationships. The third bullet point on here is get comfortable approaching community members for funds. That's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's really hard to ask folks for money, and it takes some time to get used to that. So really, that again is something that you got to get comfortable with, and you are doing something with a nonprofit to better the community. That's your goal, to better the community, to better people's lives in most cases. And that, you're working for social change in most cases with nonprofit organizations. So you have to remember that when you're asking them for money, that this is part of a greater good, and that you're not just asking them for money for your own personal benefit. You're asking their money for this organization so that you can continue to affect positive social change in the community, with individuals and individual lives or on a larger level. Keep really good records of your donations, and thank folks for donating. Really thank people for donating. That's vitally important. I remember I worked for an organization that, and I haven't worked for a lot of organizations. I keep saying I work for different organizations, but it's mainly 2 or 3 that I'm talking about. I worked for one organization where the newsletter, every time the newsletter went out, we get a call from somebody. You misspelled my name, or, you didn't put this in. And it was really important to get those right, really, really important, and to thank people appropriately. One of the things we always did at one organization I worked for is, instead of just sending a letter out that we could do on the computer, we actually hand wrote the notes, to really personalize it. So staff would take some and write notes, or we had a group of volunteers who actually were part of the program who would write the notes and talk about their experience and what this program meant to them. So it was a way to really make it personal for folks, and to say, hey, I got a handwritten note from this organization. They really, really care about my donation, and I'm going to keep coming back. Okay. The other avenue that I recommend is private funding. And there's all different kinds of foundations. So we're just going to go over a few of these. One is independent foundations, which are funded by individuals or through family endowments. And these vary in size from the largest foundations in the world, like the Gates Foundation, to really small family foundations that may have a particular interest in a particular subject. And you can research these, again, at the Foundation Center. It has a lot of information, either online if you're not near one, or if you're near a Foundation Center library, you can actually go there and research those. Private funding, independent foundations, some of the advantages, they usually have very clear guidelines and processes for applying. They can be a source of large amounts of grants. They have a professional staff, and they may provide support for specific causes. The challenge is the application is lengthy usually, or it can be lengthy. It's hard to access a personal relationship in many cases with these organizations because, my experience with them is a lot of the family foundations, and most of the ones I dealt with were smaller family foundations. They had a person who worked on staff, but to get to the family or to get to know the family a little bit, or people who were their trustees, was a little bit more difficult to develop a relationship with them. They may not accept unsolicited proposals. The money may be geared for a particular geographic area, for specific organizations and issues. And then the other thing is you need to have your 501c3, which many organizations that I work with don't quite have those yet. So as well, and they also, in many cases, don't like to fund general operating expenses, or the funding's time limited, so it's not going to sustain you. It may take you for a year or two, but it may not take you, or 3, but it may not take you past that. So the other way is through community foundations, and these are like family foundations in the sense that, but they're taking money in from all different families and all different donors. So they're accumulating donations and funds from families and organizations from throughout the area. And community foundations generally serve a geographic area, like the Cleveland Foundation in Ohio funds, organizations. It funds organizations in this geographic area, the greater Cleveland area. Some community foundations may define their community by an issue or by a constituency as well. Some advantages, again, they usually have staff and they're available and professional, and you could develop a relationship with a program officer or a program director at that foundation. Some of the challenges, a lot of the money is already predetermined where it's going to go, so only a small percentage of the funds may be unrestricted and available to a startup organization. And again, they don't like to fund general operating expenses, and it's time limited. And again, a lot of these won't fund startup organizations as well. Some will, but some won't. Another private funding opportunity is through corporate foundations and corporations. This is funded through a single company, through an endowment or annual donation. These organizations, these foundations are usually legally and fiscally separate from the company. The advantages of these, they can be source of large amounts of money. They may provide ongoing support, and they often have professional and accessible staff. But their average grant is usually not that large, and again, you're going to have to meet specific guidelines. And if you're not in the community where they are, you're probably not going to get funded through them. And again, they don't like to fund general operating expenses, and it's time limited as well. And then there are the federated programs, giving programs like the United Way or other community sharing programs. These, like the foundations, each of these are different. So you got to really look locally to see how they do this. But usually there's a fairly clear process. It's a steady stream of money. But again, they usually don't like to fund startups. And they're interested in, a lot of times, like the United Way, in direct service versus organizations that are working on a macro level, on issues or advocacy, things like that. Where to start? With the organizations that I've worked with here in Cleveland, most of them aren't ready to go to the large foundations. So I tell them to start small, to start with local funders, and that's really important. The larger the geographic area that the funder serves, there's going to be more competition, and it's really going to be hard or impossible to have a relationship with them. I remember in my previous employment as a community organizer, we were trying to raise money. And, there's certain proposals. I wrote some great proposals with residents, and we turned them in to these large foundations across the country, and we never got anywhere. We may have gotten a little letter back, expressing interest. But unless you have a connection to that funder, it's highly unlikely you're going to get funded, especially if you're a startup. You're better off starting with a local funder where you can develop a relationship, where you know them, you may have a connection to them in some way through your previous employment or somebody else and that is a better way to go, in my opinion. Funders are also going to look for the strength of your program, and if you have a record of accomplishment, a clear plan of action that will lead to the results you promised, a detailed budget, and then a similarity between your mission and theirs. So if you're doing environmental work, they're going to, you're not going to apply for funding to an organization, a foundation that may be interested in working on youth programming. There may be some connection there. I don't know. You'll have to look at that. But it's really important to do the research to find out what this foundation's about, who they funded before, and when their grant cycles are, who are their trustees, all those different things to really find out a lot about that foundation so that when you do apply, you're really clear that this one makes sense and that you're applying to a foundation where you could actually get funded. And then assure them that you're knowledgeable about your work, and that comes through the face-to-face meetings and also in the proposals you write as well. So a couple of places where groups start here in Cleveland. One is through the small grants, grassroots grant opportunities, and these are really taking off all around the country. There's an organization called grassrootsgrantmakers.org. That's their website, www.grassrootsgrantmakers.org. And they have a large membership of grassroots grant makers across the country that you can look up and see and there are links to those organizations on their website where you can see if there's one in your area. And they are getting bigger. They're getting more and more of these around the country. These grants are usually easier to obtain. They're not as competitive as the large grants. They're for smaller amounts, generally for smaller amounts, $500 to $10,000, usually for 1 year. And in most cases, you don't need a 501c3. So if you're a startup organization and you're not sure if you want to go through the process of formalizing or, and you don't have your 501c3, then for a lot of these grassroots grants, you can find a fiscal agent, a nonprofit, to serve as your fiscal agent and hold your funds. That's a great way to start, a way to prove yourself, to do this for a couple of years as a way to raise some funds to develop your program and develop your expertise. The second thing you could do is find an established organization or organizations that you can partner with to secure funding and prove yourself. It could be a local school. If you're doing an arts program, it could be working with that school. It could be working with another nonprofit, a larger nonprofit, where you can be a program of theirs for a short time just to prove yourself and to develop the capacity to move out on your own. If you are established in the community, you personally, but your organization is new, you may have a relationship with a local funder already or a good reputation with those funders. So talk with them a little bit and set up a meeting with them, or even if you don't, you could call them and see if there's an opportunity to meet with a program officer for a local foundation and say, this is what I plan to do. This is what I want to do. Talk to them about your case statement and then see, where is there an opportunity here for us to get funded, and what would it take for us to get funded through your foundation? Because different foundations have different criteria. For the Cleveland Foundation here, usually a community-based organization needs 3 or 4 years of successful implementation of their program and development of their organization to get funded to the larger organization. So, to be really realistic about that, and it's always good to talk to somebody to find out what's going on here, because each foundation has different criteria like any organization, and you want to find out what you need to do. And then research local grant opportunities that may be available for startup organizations. We post a lot of those for Cleveland on our website. Small grants that are available, maybe just a few $100s. There's one on our website now to provide kinship care through the county. It's only for $600, but it's for grassroots organizations, for startup organizations. And the final thing I tell groups is really stay true to your mission. Don't chase dollars. If you're going to chase dollars, you're really going to get yourself into trouble, especially with grants. You're going to be doing programs that have nothing to do with your mission or very little to do with your mission, and you're going to get really off base. I worked as a community organizer, and as I said, and one of the things, we applied for a lead grant to take lead out of homes. I mean, it's an important issue, don't get me wrong, but it really doesn't fit in with a group that's trying to do community organizing. It really didn't fit into our mission, but it provided us some dollars. So where to research foundation grants? The Foundation Center is a great place, foundationcenter.org. One I mentioned before, grassrootsgrantmakers.org, is to locate some of the small grassroots funders across the country. The Grant Seeker's Guide is a book that can provide you with some help. Local newspapers, many times local newspapers, a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper, has someone who writes on philanthropy, and they'll post things in the paper on, grant deadlines that are approaching and funding opportunities. So you may want to contact that local paper to find out who that person is who writes on philanthropy. Publications like the Nonprofit Times, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Nonprofit Quarterly, and then email lists. You can get on the email list from the Foundation Center that will send you a list of RFPs. Local foundations have newsletters, both email and also hard copies. You can get on their email lists. Community groups, if you have a local community development corporation, social service agency that may send out emails or newsletters. And then the Foundation Center, as I said, is key. So really try and get as many contacts, both via email and also copies of things as you can, and keep your antenna up so that you're always aware if there's a funding opportunity that comes along. Until I came to this job, I didn't realize there were so many grassroots grants available in the city of Cleveland. I had no idea until I came here, and now I realize there's quite a few opportunities. It's competitive, but there's opportunities out there for organizations, startup organizations. Just a little bit on earned income. Earned income, this is a way to make money for your organization through income-generating opportunities. This, it would be like selling merchandise, T-shirts, whatever it may be. It could be collecting fees for service, renting space, starting a small for-profit arm of your nonprofit. It's really important to talk to people about this first, a tax attorney or auditor, because only a certain percentage of this earned income, you can only make a certain percent of your overall budget from earned income. So it's really important, and that varies from state to state. So I'd really look at that closely. You may want to look at this a little further down the road. But one of the things this does is if you do have this, and I'm not discouraging this, but I do think that this is something that may be for organizations that have developed a little further on from being a startup, is find ways, this builds awareness about your organization. It does provide an opportunity for your clients to build skills. I know there's a lot of organizations where youth produce things and then it's sold, or people who are mentally challenged or physically challenged, produce things and then sell that as well. And it's a way to get information out there about your organization and also making your organization more self-reliant. And it's also a way to get money and donations and funds from folks who may not donate. Folks would buy something, but they wouldn't give money, and that's a way to do that as well. There's a woman organization I work with here, the head of that organization. They do cooking classes, and the idea is to reduce obesity in Cleveland, and it's a small grassroots organization. And she just produced a cookbook, and now she's going to sell that cookbook. And that may be a way for her to raise funds through earned income if she can sell those. And it's a very good cookbook, by the way. You can look on our website in a few weeks, and it'll probably be up there. Government grants. Government grants usually don't fund startup organizations. These are usually long and involved applications. A lot of times the funds you get reimbursed, so you put the money out there, then get reimbursed by the government, and in many cases there's a lag time between when you do the work and when you get the money back. It can provide large sums of money, but there's a big reporting process involved in that. Usually you have to hire somebody to actually do the reporting. So that is pretty unrealistic, I think, for most startup organizations. The other thing I tell folks who are at startups is really get support. This is really vital. Is there a training or technical assistance program through the small grants program where you're funded? We have a few of those. We have a small organizational development program with our small grants program, and I think that's a key component of most grassroots grants programs. So they probably do have something. Is there a training or technical assistance through a local community college or university? There's some free fellowships through those for folks working in the community that may be available. Do you have a local list of recommended consultants? Does your local foundation center have a local list that they recommend, or other folks who could contact for assistance for organizational development, for grant writing, to work with your board, And then, is there someone you worked with, who you have a former supervisor, a former executive director, who could serve as a mentor to you and your organization? To create an advisory board, that you have a group of people you trust that have expertise in the field that you can bounce ideas off of and help you as you move forward, as well as your board of directors. And then, are there peer learning groups, or other opportunities to network in the community with other leaders of new nonprofit organizations and startup organizations? Relationships are key to this whole thing. I mean, the relationships, it's about relationships, and it's in relationships to funders, it's relationships to donors, it's also relationships to folks that can provide you assistance. It's really, really important to create those and seek those relationships and nurture those relationships. So just as a quick review, first, fundraising strategies, you need to develop a strong case statement. You need to research how to find how much you need to create a budget. So how much you're actually going to need to raise, and that can come in different forms. I didn't mention this before, but like I said, it's really important to diversify your funding mix and also to be realistic about those needs, and then determine the best ways to fund your organization and who to approach. If you have further questions, my contact information is here. Feel free to call me. You can email me as well. You can look on our website just to see, I know it's Cleveland, Ohio, but you can see some of the more information on grassroots grant makers there, as well as on other funding opportunities. So I'll be happy to answer your questions.
I've got a question for you. Let's say that you've identified a couple hundred potential individual donors for the startup phase of your organization, and you've kind of grouped them into the potential capacity that they have to give, low, medium, and high. Is there any logic to which group you approach first? Do you approach the people who can only maybe give you a couple $100, or do you approach the people who might be able to give you a couple $1,000 first?
Well, I think that's a decision. You need to think about your relationships with those folks and see who you may have the best relationships with. I think one of the things you need to do is to ask yourself how much you actually need. So, and if some folks can't give, say, $1,000 or $2,000, how many of those donations do you actually need for your startup? And then you're going to need to approach a few of those. And then how many of the $500 range can folks give that you've identified, and how do you actually go? How many of those do you need? So really being clear about how many of each category you need, and then approaching those folks in that fashion. One thing you may want to do, it always helps to get the large donations, but I think it comes down to how comfortable you are. I would say if you're just starting out, you may want to work with some small donors first to build up to become more comfortable in presenting your case statement and asking for money, and then going to some of the heavier hitters a little bit later once you're comfortable with it. So, and I think it's being clear of what you need and actually breaking it down. How many donors you need from different categories to actually get the resources you need.
Okay. Well, thank you all for participating. Thank you very much.